Here we are at the Times and Sunday Times Cheltenham Literature Festival, and look who I'm joined by, regular voice on Times Radio and founder of Conservative Home, Tim Montgomerie. Hi, Tim.
Hi there. I'm not just founder of Conservative Home. I see from this band that I'm wearing that I'm now an artist.
You are an artist.
Which is an elevation I never expected or certainly deserved, but I'm really going to enjoy so long as this wristband is
You're here with the literati, you see. You're part of the showbiz elite. You're here today because you're going to take part in one of our panels about the US election, about a month to go. Give me your sense of where the state of the race is.
They say too close to call, don't they, James? And this is absolutely too close to call. Anyone who is convinced they know what's going to happen, I think, is deceiving themselves and deceiving anyone they talk to. I think we've seen so many US presidential races, so many senatorial, congressional races which are so close. And I think this one's going to be exactly the same. A few battleground states. We can predict what's going to happen now. We can have Bruce Springsteen rallies with Barack Obama speaking in favour of Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania and Michigan, and Donald Trump doing late night. Was it YMCA he danced to, I think?
Yeah, he does dance to YMCA. He certainly did in 2020, yeah.
So I think we'll have quite a lot of that in the early days of November.
If you were an American, Tim, if you had a vote, who would you be supporting? Because it's interesting how you've got some British Conservatives, including some of the ones running for leader this time around, like Robert Jenrick, saying they would support Trump. And you've got others who are far more critical of Trump. As a British Conservative, how do you view him? Well,
slightly different questions you just asked. In terms of my view of him, I don't like him. I think he's not a good man. And in a way, I remember when I was covering the Clinton-Trump race for the Times back in 2016, I visited a church in South Carolina. After the service on the Sunday, they served chicken, fried chicken to die for. I would have converted to that church there and then. I've been there every Sunday. And they were all Trump supporters. And I said to them, you were Christians, why did you back him? And they said to me, we would never let him preach in this church. But if it's about protecting us on tax, religious liberty, Supreme Court justices on abortion, etc., we think he's more of an ally than the Democrats would be. And I feel the same, actually. I don't like his character. I wouldn't defend some of the way he behaves. But you look what Democrats have done in America. They've raised taxes. They've failed to control the border in the South. Immigration taking place on an uncontrolled scale that I think is very dangerous. You look at what the teacher unions do, particularly in places like Chicago. They're unaccountable. Black kids in America are growing up in schools which really are sink schools, and the teacher unions are defending the most backwards of standards. San Francisco, other American great cities, have become centres of crime because of the liberal policies of the Democrats. So
you would hold your nose and vote for Trump if you're in America?
It is a big holding of the nose. It would need a very big peg. But ultimately, I think one of the problems the media has, I think this is true in America and in Britain, is there is an enormous focus on what Trump says, understandably, because he says controversial things. But actually, if you look what he did in power, and you look what most Republicans do when they're in power, it was a fairly standard conservative recipe. Now, people who don't like standard conservative recipes won't like what he did. But I would vote for him on the basis that if you want control of immigration, you want your taxes kept down, you want traditional policies on crime, you're much more likely to get them from Trump than from Harris. And in fact, from Harris, you'll probably get the opposite. She really is a liberal Californian Democrat at core.
Is there not a conservative case against Trump, though? I mean, he has moved in a far more economically populist direction. He imposed tariffs on everything from steel to washing machines. Only last week he proposed putting tariffs of 200% on the American agricultural giant John Deere. That's not very Reaganomics. And then if you look at his foreign policy, he's incredibly isolationist in a way that Ronald Reagan just wouldn't recognise.
Oh, there's lots of things that I do not like about Trump, but a lot of the tariffs policy I think is more complicated than just about an economic issue. I think China is the biggest geopolitical threat that the West faces. And I am 54. I've been fortunate to live in a period where the West, the good guys in my view, have had economic, technological, military superiority. We've been in charge of the world's affairs to some extent. We certainly haven't been vulnerable to bad guys being able to dictate things. I think that's at risk. China is not going away. China is a powerful economic and technological force potentially in the future. We have to compete with it. And I think a lot of Donald Trump's protectionism is a recognition that we should not be allowing another superpower to overtake us. And so and I think that's a general thing that is true of Trump generally. He doesn't always get the rhetoric right, he doesn't get the policy right, but his instinct to overturn what was Clinton, Obama, George W. Bush, they all basically allowed China to get into the position that it has. And they were wrong. And he said, no, I'm going to try and change direction. Maybe he hasn't changed direction in the right way completely, but overall, like with the Iran nuclear deal, he took money away from Iran. That means at the moment, Iran is the impoverished state that it is, not able to fight Israel in the way that it would have otherwise have been.
The other argument you hear from some former Republicans, or even Republicans who just refuse to vote for Trump, is whatever you think of his domestic agenda, the fact that, for example, he refused to accept the results of the last election, and his behaviour around January the 6th should be a disqualifying measure, that some things are bigger than domestic policy. And you have people like Dick Cheney, for example, former vice president. You don't get much more conservative than Dick Cheney, saying he is a threat to the Republic.
Yeah.
Do you see it that way?
I think that is the best argument against Trump, and it's a huge blot on his coffee book. And ultimately, though, he did surrender power.
Kicking and screaming.
Well, yeah, but he did surrender power. He behaved like a childish brat, and I will not defend what he did. But ultimately, we should not underestimate the maturity of America's institutions. And even if he had resisted, I don't think he would have been allowed to resist. So it's back to my church, that example of those people in that church with the fried chicken, James. I would not have him near a pulpit in my church. He is not a good moral teacher for children or whatever. But if the choice is between someone who, for example, in Kamala Harris, there'll be different views on abortion in Britain, but Kamala Harris supports policies that basically would abortion up to birth, which for me is effectively infanticide. So, there are extremes on both sides, and politics is about choosing. It's not about having the ideal candidate, and that's why I would, with that big peg on my nose, vote for Trump.
Just finally, let's touch on UK politics briefly.
It's much less exciting, isn't it?
Well, I mean, although it might be quite exciting this week, because we're coming into a big week for the Tory leadership contest. The 4 are going to be whittled down to 2. MPs are voting. A week ago, there was a sense it was going to be Kemi Badenoch versus Robert Jenrick. James Cleverly had a good conference. Who do you think the final 2 will be?
Well, when I used to work at the Times as a column writer, John Witherow, the former relative, told me to stop making predictions. So you're now asking me to contravene that prediction, that promise. But I think it will be Jenrick versus Cleverly. I think Tom Tugendhat, who has been my candidate throughout the race, underperformed, unfortunately, in Birmingham, probably throughout the race, although I think he's still the best candidate. In Kemi Badenoch, she's very clear what she believes on the culture wars, but I don't think she's developed a wider conservatism. And she is someone, as been said by many other people, I'm not saying something new here, she does cross, she'll cross a road to pick a fight with someone.
And that row about maternity pay, and of course she made those comments on Times Radio, whether you agree with her on the substance or not, a lot of people thought that's an unforced error and shows political naivety almost.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have noticed that, Tory MPs have noticed that. So you can remind me of this prediction in 3 or 4 days' time. But I think it will be Jenrick versus Cleverly. And that really is going to be quite a choice for party members. They're going to have this Reagan-esque, optimistic guy who basically is a centrist, wants no deal with reform, James Cleverly. And then they're going to have up against him someone who really is offering a quite a sort of reform adjacent Conservative Party with policies on net zero, immigration, human rights, etc., that Nigel Farage could support. And I think it's going to be a real choice for party members what kind of Conservative Party they want in future. And so, maybe you were right to caution me. Maybe the leadership race is about to get interesting. We'll have 2 interesting contests concluded within a couple of days of each other.
Tim Montgomerie, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.